He smiled, and it was the most chilling expression I'd ever seen on my child's face. You'll find out soon enough. After Derek left, I sat in my kitchen, reviewing the digital recording. Every threat, every admission of bribery, every promise to make my life hell, all captured in perfect clarity. My phone rang at 10:30. Tiffany. Margaret, I just wanted you to know that Derek and I are very disappointed in your decision tonight. I'm sure you are. We really hoped we could resolve this quietly, within the family. But since you've chosen to be difficult, we're going to have to take other measures. What kind of measures? Well, starting tomorrow, we're going to be sharing some very interesting information with your friends and neighbors about your mental state, about the questionable circumstances surrounding Joe's death, about how you've been hiding assets from the family. All lies. Maybe, but you know how people talk in a small town. Once rumors start, they have a way of taking on a life of their own. The threat was clear. They were going to destroy my reputation, turn my friends and neighbors against me, make me a pariah in the community I'd called home for 45 years. And that's not all, Tiffany continued. We've also been in touch with some very interesting people who have a financial interest in Derek's well-being. My blood ran cold. The loan sharks. They're very concerned about Derek's ability to pay his debts, but they're also very understanding about family obligations. They know that sometimes elderly parents need a little encouragement to help their children. Are you threatening to have me hurt? I'm not threatening anything. I'm just saying that Derek's creditors are aware of his family situation, and they're willing to be very creative about debt collection. After she hung up, I didn't sit around feeling sorry for myself. At 68, I'd learned that wallowing in self-pity was a luxury I couldn't afford. Instead, I called Patricia. Margaret, do you know what time it is? Patricia, I need you to do something first thing tomorrow morning. I want you to set up a trust. What kind of trust? The kind that puts every penny of that farm money beyond Derek's reach. No matter what happens to me. There was a pause. Margaret, are you all right? You sound different. I'm not scared, Patricia. I'm angry. And when I get angry, I get very creative about solving problems. What kind of creative? The kind that's going to teach my son that threatening his mother was the biggest mistake he ever made. Because Derek and Tiffany had made one crucial error in their planning. They assumed I was just a helpless old woman who would fold under pressure. They clearly didn't know me very well. Tuesday morning, I discovered just how serious Derek and Tiffany were about their threats. By 8 a.m., half the town had heard about my mental decline. Frank knocked on my door before I'd finished my first cup of coffee. Maggie, there's some nasty talk going around town. You need to know what people are saying. Let me guess. I'm going senile, hiding money from my poor, devoted son, and probably killed my husband for the insurance money? Frank's expression confirmed my suspicions. How did you know? Because I know exactly who's spreading these rumors and why. My phone had been ringing since 6 a.m. Old friends calling with barely concealed curiosity, wanting to hear my side of the story. Neighbors offering help with difficult family situations. The church secretary asking if I needed someone to help with my finances. Each conversation was a careful dance, people fishing for information while pretending to offer support. In a small town, gossip spreads faster than wildfire and burns twice as hot. But at 68, I'd learned that sometimes the best defense is a good offense. I called Ruby Martinez. Ruby, remember that investigating you did for me? Well, now I need you to share what you found. Honey, are you sure? Once this gets out, there's no putting it back. I'm sure. People deserve to know the truth about Derek and Tiffany's financial situation before they start feeling too sorry for them. Ruby went to work with the efficiency of a military operation. By 3 o'clock, word was spreading through town about Derek's gambling debts, Tiffany's maxed-out credit cards, and their desperate attempt to steal their elderly mother's money. The tide of public opinion began to shift faster than I'd expected. At 4 o'clock, I got a call from Dr. Phillips. Margaret, I've had some very disturbing conversations today. Several people have asked me about your mental state, your cognitive function. Someone's been suggesting that you're not competent to handle your own affairs. What did you tell them? The truth, that you're in excellent health and sharp as ever. But Margaret, I'm concerned about what's behind these inquiries. Family greed, doctor. Nothing more complicated than that. That evening, Derek called, and I could hear the panic in his voice. Mom, People are saying terrible things about Tiffany and me, lies about our finances, about gambling debts. You need to make them stop. Derek, I have no control over what people say. This is your fault. You're the one spreading these rumors. No, son, I'm just the one who stopped covering up your mistakes. You're destroying our reputation. You destroyed your own reputation the minute you decided to threaten your mother for money. We're family. Family doesn't break into each other's houses. Family doesn't hire private investigators to spy on each other. Family doesn't threaten to have loan sharks hurt their own mother. There was a long silence. Finally, Derek's voice came back, cold and calculating. Fine. You want to play hardball? Game on. He hung up, and I knew the real war was about to begin. Wednesday morning brought the first direct assault. I woke up to find my car tires slashed and thief spray-painted across my garage door. Frank found me cleaning off the paint when he came by for his morning check-in. Maggie, this has gone too far. You need to call the police. Already done, I said, holding up my phone. Officer Thompson is on his way. And Frank? My security cameras caught everything. Before Frank could respond, a black pickup truck pulled into my driveway. 2 men got out. Large, intimidating types who clearly weren't there for a social visit. Mrs. Caldwell, the larger one called out, we need to have a conversation. Frank immediately stepped in front of me, but I put a hand on his arm. 45 years of dealing with difficult people had taught me that showing fear only made things worse. Gentlemen, you're on private property. State your business or leave. This is private family business. Derek Caldwell owes us money, and we understand his mother has the means to help him out. I don't know anything about my son's debts, I said firmly. And I'm not responsible for paying them. The second man smiled unpleasantly. Ma'am, family is family. Sometimes elderly parents need help understanding their obligations. Are you threatening me? We're explaining the situation. Derek owes $75,000. Interest is accruing daily. We're sure a loving mother wouldn't want to see her son hurt over money she could easily afford to pay. Frank had his phone out. I'm calling the police. Go ahead, the first man said calmly. We're just having a conversation. What they didn't know was that my security system was recording everything, and Officer Thompson was already on his way. After they left, I sat on my porch waiting for the police, not feeling victimized, but energized. Derek had escalated to sending criminals to threaten me, which meant he was getting desperate. And desperate people make mistakes. When Officer Thompson arrived, I had digital video of the entire encounter, along with Derek's recorded threats from the night before. Mrs. Caldwell, this is serious evidence of criminal intimidation. We can arrest your son today. Not yet, I said. I want to see how far he's willing to go. Because at 68, I'd learned that sometimes you have to let your enemies dig their own graves. And Derek was doing a beautiful job with the shovel. Thursday morning, I walked into that courtroom dressed in my best Sunday suit and carrying a briefcase that contained enough ammunition to blow Derek and Tiffany's case to smithereens. Judge Harrison was a fair man who'd presided over disputes in our county for 20 years. He didn't like his time wasted, and he especially didn't like family members who tried to manipulate the system. Derek and Tiffany sat at the plaintiff's table with their lawyer, a slick-looking man from the city who probably charged more per hour than most people made in a week. They looked confident, almost smug. They shouldn't have, Patricia whispered in my ear as we took our seats. Margaret, are you sure about this strategy? It's risky. Patricia, I've been taking risks my whole life. Joe and I risked everything when we bought that farm. I risked everything again when I had to run it alone after he died. This is just one more risk. Derek's lawyer, a man named Ashford, stood up to present their case. He painted a picture of a woman in rapid mental decline, making impulsive decisions, showing paranoid behavior, and desperately in need of protection from her own poor judgment. He presented their witnesses, store clerks who testified about my supposedly confused behavior, neighbors who swore I'd been acting strangely, even a handwriting expert who claimed my signature on the farm sale documents showed signs of cognitive impairment. It was a masterful performance, built on lies and paid testimony, but masterful nonetheless. Then it was our turn. Patricia stood up with a confidence that made Derek's smug expression falter. Your Honor, the petitioners have presented an elaborate fiction designed to mask their real motivation: getting control of Margaret Caldwell's money to pay Derek Caldwell's substantial gambling debts. Objection, Ashford called out. Mr. Caldwell's personal finances aren't relevant to his mother's mental competency. Your Honor, Patricia replied smoothly, we'll demonstrate that those finances are the entire motivation for this frivolous petition. Judge Harrison leaned forward. I'll allow it. What happened next was beautiful to watch. Patricia methodically destroyed every piece of Derek's case. The store clerks admitted under oath that they'd been paid to testify. The neighbors confessed they'd never actually witnessed any unusual behavior. Derek had simply told them what to say. The handwriting expert was revealed to be a fraud who'd been disciplined by professional associations in 3 states. But the real bombshell came when Patricia called her surprise witness. Your Honor, I called Detective Robert Collins to the stand. Derek's face went white. Tiffany actually made a small choking sound. Detective Collins took the stand and was sworn in. He looked directly at Derek as he began his testimony. Your Honor, Derek Caldwell is currently under investigation for check fraud, identity theft, and extortion. 3 weeks ago, he attempted to forge his mother's signature on bank documents to gain access to her accounts. The courtroom erupted. Ashford was on his feet objecting. Derek was whispering frantically to Tiffany, and Judge Harrison was banging his gavel for order. Furthermore, Detective Collins continued once quiet was restored, Mr. Caldwell hired known criminals to threaten and intimidate his mother. Yesterday, he directed loan sharks to her home with instructions to collect money she legally owes no one. This is outrageous, Derek shouted, standing up. She's lying. She's manipulating everyone. Mr. Caldwell, Judge Harrison said sternly, you will sit down and remain quiet or I'll have you removed from my courtroom. But Derek was beyond rational thought. She's the one who's lost her mind. She's paranoid. She's hiding money. She's turning everyone against us. Derek, Tiffany hissed, trying to pull him back into his seat. No! Derek shoved her away. I'm sick of this. That money belongs to me. I'm her son. I deserve that money more than some strangers at a development company. Judge Harrison's expression could have frozen water. Mr. Caldwell, are you stating for the record that this competency petition is motivated by your desire to control your mother's finances? Derek's lawyer was frantically trying to get his client's attention, but Derek was past caring about legal strategy. Yes, she sold our farm without consulting the family. She's being selfish and vindictive, and she's going to destroy our lives just to spite us. Derek, shut up, Tiffany pleaded. Why should I? It's the truth. We're family. That money should be helping family, not sitting in some bank account for a woman who's going to die alone anyway. The courtroom was dead silent. Even Judge Harrison looked shocked at the venom in Derek's voice. Your Honor, Patricia said quietly, I think Mr. Caldwell has just demonstrated the true nature of this petition more effectively than any testimony I could provide. Judge Harrison nodded grimly. Indeed, he has. What happened next took exactly 3 minutes. Judge Harrison dismissed the competency petition, ordered Derek to cease all harassment of his mother, and referred the matter to the district attorney for potential criminal charges. As Derek and Tiffany were escorted out by bailiffs, Derek for contempt of court after he'd started screaming at me, I felt something I hadn't experienced in weeks. Peace. The war was over. I'd won. But the real victory wasn't keeping my money or defeating their legal challenge. The real victory was discovering that at 68, I was stronger than I'd ever imagined. 3 days after the court hearing, I was sitting on my front porch enjoying my morning coffee when Frank brought over the local newspaper. Maggie, you might want to see the front page. The headline read, Local Families' Greed Exposed in Court. Below it was a detailed account of Derek's courtroom meltdown and the criminal charges he was now facing. The article didn't pull any punches. It described Derek's gambling debts, the forged documents, the paid witnesses, and his attempts to have his own mother declared incompetent to steal her money. The reporter had done their homework. Well, I said, folding the paper, I guess that settles the question of who's going to have a damaged reputation. My phone had been ringing all morning. Old friends calling to apologize for doubting me. Neighbors offering support. Even the pastor wanting to discuss the importance of forgiveness and family reconciliation. That last conversation had been interesting. Margaret, I know you're hurt, Pastor Williams had said, but Derek is still your son. The Lord teaches us to forgive those who wrong us. Pastor, I've forgiven Derek for being greedy, selfish, and foolish, but I haven't forgotten that he tried to steal from me, threatened me, and sent criminals to my house. Forgiveness doesn't mean stupidity. The criminal case against Derek was moving forward quickly. Detective Collins had found enough evidence to charge him with attempted fraud, extortion, and conspiracy. Tiffany was facing charges as an accomplice. Their house had been seized as part of the investigation, both cars repossessed, and Derek's gambling creditors were circling like vultures. The loan sharks who'd visited me had been arrested, and they were being remarkably cooperative about Derek's role in directing them to my home. Ruby Martinez stopped by that afternoon with updates from her extensive information network. Honey, they're finished in this town. Nobody will hire Derek. Nobody will do business with them. They're talking about moving back to her mother's place in Ohio. That's probably for the best. Maggie, I have to ask, how did you know to have all that evidence ready for court? I smiled, thinking about the hours I'd spent with Patricia preparing for every possible scenario. Ruby, I've been dealing with problems for 45 years. Weather, crop failures, equipment breakdowns, financial setbacks. The key is preparation and knowing your enemy. Your enemy? Derek stopped being my son the minute he decided my money was more important than my well-being. After that, he was just another problem to solve. That evening, I had an unexpected visitor. Tiffany showed up at my door, looking like she'd aged 10 years in the past week. Margaret, I need to talk to you. I think you've said enough, don't you? Please, just 5 minutes. Against my better judgment, I let her in. She sat at my kitchen table looking smaller and more defeated than I'd ever seen her. I want you to know that this was all Derek's idea, she began. The competency petition, the witnesses, all of it. I tried to talk him out of it, but you went along with it. I was scared. Derek owed those people so much money, and they were threatening him, us. I thought if we could just get enough money to pay them off. You thought it was acceptable to steal from his mother. Tiffany looked down at her hands. I know how it sounds, but Margaret, you have to understand. We were desperate. Desperation doesn't justify what you did. I know. I'm not trying to justify it. I'm trying to apologize. I studied my daughter-in-law's face, looking for some sign of genuine remorse beneath the self-pity. Tiffany, what exactly are you apologizing for? Trying to have me declared incompetent? Breaking into my house? Hiring someone to spy on me? Spreading lies about my mental state? Threatening to have loan sharks hurt me? Or just for getting caught? She was crying now, ugly tears that smeared her makeup. All of it. Everything. Margaret, I'm so sorry. Sorry enough to testify against Derek at his criminal trial? The question stopped her tears instantly. What? The prosecutor wants Derek to pay for what he did. Your testimony about his planning, his threats, his manipulation of evidence, that would be very helpful to their case. I can't testify against my husband. Even though he's willing to let you take the fall for conspiracy charges? Tiffany's face went pale. What do you mean? Derek's lawyer is arguing that you masterminded the whole scheme, that you manipulated Derek into going along with your plan to steal from me. Apparently, you're going to be the villain in his version of events. The look of betrayal that crossed Tiffany's face was almost satisfying. He wouldn't do that. Tiffany, the man threw you under the bus to save himself, just like he was willing to destroy his own mother for gambling money. Why would you be any different? After Tiffany left, I sat in my kitchen thinking about families and loyalty and the price of greed. Derek had destroyed not just his relationship with me, but his marriage, his reputation, and his freedom, all for money he'd never earned and never deserved. The phone rang. Patricia. Margaret, I have news about the criminal case. Derek's been offered a plea deal. What kind of deal? 18 months in prison, full restitution for your legal fees, and a permanent restraining order. He'd also have to publicly admit that you were never mentally incompetent and that the entire petition was fraudulent. And if he doesn't take it, then he goes to trial and faces up to 10 years if convicted on all charges. I thought about it for a moment. Patricia, what do you recommend? Take the deal. It gives you everything you wanted: vindication, compensation, and protection from future harassment. Then that's what we'll do. 6 months later, I was sitting on the porch of my new house, a comfortable place on 5 acres just outside town, reading about Derek's release from county jail. He'd served 8 months of his sentence and been paroled for good behavior. The newspaper mentioned that he and Tiffany had divorced and that he'd moved to Ohio to start over. I felt no satisfaction in his downfall, but no regret either. Derek had made his choices, and now he was living with the consequences. As for me, I was living proof that sometimes the best revenge is simply refusing to be a victim. 1 year later, I was hosting Thanksgiving dinner in my new house for a very different kind of family than the one I'd been born into. Frank was there, of course, along with Ruby Martinez and her grandson. Dr. Phillips and his wife joined us, as did Patricia and Detective Collins, who'd become an unexpected friend through this whole ordeal. "Margaret," Ruby said as we cleared the dishes, "I have to ask, do you ever regret how things turned out with Derek?" It was a question I'd been asked many times over the past year. By friends, by my pastor, even by the therapist I'd seen briefly to help process the trauma of being betrayed by my own child. "Ruby, I regret that Derek chose greed over family. I regret that he let gambling destroy his judgment. I regret that he was willing to hurt his own mother for money. But do I regret standing up for myself? Not for a second." "What about forgiveness?" Dr. Phillips asked gently. "Some people think you were too hard on him. I've forgiven Derek for being weak, for making bad choices, for disappointing me. But forgiveness doesn't mean pretending it never happened, or making myself vulnerable to being hurt again." Detective Collins raised his glass. "To Margaret Caldwell, who proved that farm women are tougher than they look." "I'll drink to that," Frank said. As my chosen family laughed and shared stories around my table, I thought about the journey that had brought me here. A year ago, I'd been a woman whose son saw her as nothing more than a source of money. Today, I was surrounded by people who valued me for who I was, not what I could give them. The farm money? I'd put most of it in a trust that would eventually benefit local charities. Some went to a scholarship fund for young people who wanted to study agriculture. A portion helped fund a program for elderly people dealing with financial abuse from family members. I kept enough for a comfortable retirement, my new house, and the occasional trip to places Joe and I had always wanted to visit, but never could afford. 3 weeks ago, I'd gotten a letter from Derek. No return address, postmarked from somewhere in Ohio. In it, he'd written a brief apology and asked if there was any chance we could reconcile. I'd thought about that letter for a long time before writing back. "Derek," I'd written, "I will always love the little boy who brought me dandelions and called them flowers. But that little boy grew up to be a man who tried to steal from his mother and destroy her life for gambling money. I've forgiven you, but I will never trust you again. I hope you've learned from your mistakes and found a way to live with integrity. Take care of yourself." I'd mailed it without including my return address. Some bridges, once burned, can't be rebuilt. But that doesn't mean you can't build new ones. As Thanksgiving dinner wound down and my friends prepared to leave, Frank lingered on the porch. "Maggie, you know you saved a lot of people with how you handled this situation, don't you?" "What do you mean?" "You proved that elderly folks don't have to be victims. You showed that families can't just steamroll their older members because they think they're entitled to their money. You changed how people think about these situations." I looked out over my new property, at the small vegetable garden I'd planted, at the bird feeders that attracted cardinals and blue jays every morning. "Frank, I didn't set out to change anything. I just refused to let my son steal from me. Sometimes that's all it takes." As Frank drove away, I sat on my porch watching the sun set over my new life. A life built on my own terms, surrounded by people who respected me, free from the fear and manipulation that had defined those terrible months with Derek and Tiffany. My phone buzzed with a text from my neighbor's granddaughter, a young woman who'd started stopping by to hear my stories about farming and standing up for yourself. "Mrs. Caldwell, my boyfriend has been pressuring me to lend him money for his business. After hearing about what you went through, I told him no. He didn't like it, but I stood my ground. Thank you for showing me it's okay to protect myself." I smiled as I typed back, "Good for you, honey. Never let anyone make you feel guilty for keeping what you've earned." As the stars came out over my 5 acres, I thought about the woman I'd become through this ordeal. Stronger, wiser, more selective about who I allowed in my life. Derek had tried to make me a victim. Instead, he'd made me a survivor. And in the end, that was a gift I hadn't expected, but would treasure for the rest of my days. The farm was gone, sold to developers who would turn it into suburban homes. But what I'd built on that land, my strength, my independence, my refusal to be anyone's victim, that was mine forever. Some inheritances, after all, are worth more than money. And no one, not even family, can steal what truly belongs to you. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe and feel free to share your story in the comments. Your voice matters. Since you're living here for free, you'll pay rent by working as my maid, you useless old woman. The ceramic plate exploded against the kitchen cabinet, sauce spattering across my knees as I dropped down to clean it. That's when I heard those familiar military boots crossing the hardwood floor. David had heard every poisonous word his wife just spat at me. What happened next would expose months of carefully crafted lies. If you're watching this, hit subscribe and let me know in the comments where you're from. Trust me, you need to see how this manipulative snake finally got caught. But let me back up and tell you how a woman like me ended up on her knees, scrubbing food off the floor while a girl young enough to be my daughter stood over me like some twisted queen. I'm Margaret Foster, and at 63, I thought I had life figured out. Comfortable retirement, paid-off house in suburban Atlanta, decent health. Then Dr. Williams found something during my routine mammogram that changed everything. The tumor is aggressive, but treatable with immediate surgery, he explained. However, your insurance has significant gaps. We're looking at about $87,000 out of pocket. My life savings was maybe $28,000. The math was simple and terrifying. My son David called from Fort Bragg that evening. At 38, he was a career Army officer, practical, decisive, and thankfully generous in a crisis. Mom, we're selling the house. Use the money for surgery and recovery. Jennifer and I already discussed it. You're moving in with us while you get back on your feet. David, I can't disrupt your lives. You're not. We want you close. After losing Dad, the thought of you going through this alone, his voice caught. I won't risk it. His wife Jennifer got on the extension. We're so excited to have you here, Mom Foster. This will be perfect timing, actually. The house sold within 3 weeks. After medical expenses, I had $19,000 left, enough to eventually rent a small apartment once I recovered and found work, but not enough for immediate independence. Here's where things get interesting. David and Jennifer had been renting a small townhouse, but with my recovery needs, they decided to buy a proper house with space for all of us. David used my remaining money as the down payment and put the deed in my name for tax purposes. Something about protecting my assets, he said. This way the house is yours, Mom, but we'll all live here together as family, David explained. When you're fully recovered, if you want your own place, we can sell and split the proceeds. Jennifer smiled warmly. Though honestly, we hope you'll want to stay. It's nice having family close. The basement was converted into my recovery suite with medical-grade bathroom fixtures, a small kitchenette, and separate entrance. Professional work that David arranged while I was still in the hospital. The first 6 weeks were genuinely wonderful. Jennifer drove me to appointments, made homemade soup when I was exhausted, and we'd watch old movies together. I started thinking this arrangement was a blessing in disguise. Jennifer's been an absolute angel, I told David during one of our video calls. I don't know what I would have done without her. She adores you, David replied. She told me yesterday that having you here has been the highlight of this whole year. But the week before David deployed to Germany for 6 months, something shifted. Jennifer became distant, less available, slightly impatient with my questions. I watched from my window as she waved goodbye to David, playing the perfect military wife. The moment his car disappeared, she turned and looked directly at me. For just a second, I saw something cold and hungry in her expression. Then she smiled and waved, but the warmth never reached her eyes. 2 days later, the caring daughter-in-law I'd been living with vanished entirely. The transformation didn't happen overnight. Jennifer was too smart for that. It started with tiny boundary violations that seemed almost accidental. 3 days after David left, she walked into my space without knocking while I was getting dressed. No warning, just pushed open the door like she owned the place. "Oh, sorry," she said, but didn't look away or step back. "I was bringing your mail. Maybe knock next time?" I suggested, pulling my robe closed. "Of course, though this is all one household now." She paused deliberately. But you're right. Privacy is important for house guests. House guests. Fascinating word choice from someone who'd been calling this our family home for weeks. The next morning, a typed note appeared under my door. Morning noise carries more than expected. Please keep activities before 9 a.m. to absolute minimum. Thanks, Jay. I read it twice. I made coffee quietly, walked softly, barely used the small television, but apparently, existing before Jennifer's preferred wake-up time was problematic. That evening, she appeared with a casserole dish. Made extra tuna casserole for dinner, she announced brightly. The smell hit immediately, overwhelming onion, which she knew I couldn't eat due to acid reflux. I'd mentioned it multiple times during recovery. That's thoughtful, but onions really don't agree with me. Oh, right. Totally forgot. She snapped her fingers theatrically. My mistake. Guess you'll need to figure out dinner on your own tonight. Figure out dinner on your own. Like I was a failing roommate who hadn't contributed to groceries. Here's what Jennifer underestimated. I might have been recovering from surgery, but I wasn't recovering from 63 years of reading people. I'd navigated workplace politics, raised a son through difficult teens, managed household budgets through recessions. I recognized manipulation when I saw it. The question was whether this was conscious testing or Jennifer's true personality emerging without her audience. That night, I climbed upstairs for what I thought would be our usual shared dinner. Oh, Jennifer looked up with apparent surprise. I only made enough for myself tonight. Figured you'd want to eat in your own space since you have that nice kitchenette. My own space. A hot plate and mini fridge hardly constituted independent cooking facilities. I could make something simple up here, I offered. Actually, I'm expecting a call from my sister. Might get emotional. Family drama, you know? She made a sympathetic face. Would you mind giving me privacy tonight? As I carried a peanut butter sandwich back downstairs, I heard Jennifer on the phone, not with any sister, but with someone named Ashley, laughing about how she was finally getting the house back to herself. I sat in my small space, eating my makeshift dinner, and realized I was watching a deliberate campaign begin. Jennifer wasn't just thoughtless, she was strategic. But if Jennifer thought I'd simply accept whatever treatment she decided to dish out, she'd seriously underestimated Margaret Foster. I started a notebook that very night, recording dates, times, and exact quotes. Not because I was planning anything specific, but because I needed to understand the game we were playing. And more importantly, I needed to figure out how to win it, because something told me this was just the beginning. By week 4 of David's deployment, Jennifer had refined her approach into something almost artistic in its cruelty. She'd started hosting weekly girls' nights every Thursday, which meant I needed to avoid the main floor to give the ladies privacy. Through the heating vents, I could hear her entertaining friends with stories about her challenging living situation. It's heartbreaking watching families struggle after medical trauma, she told someone with perfect blend of concern and martyrdom. The personality changes can be so difficult to manage. I nearly choked. Personality changes? I was the same person I'd always been. She's become so dependent since the surgery, Jennifer continued, constantly asking me to do things for her, then getting upset when I don't do them exactly right. Yesterday, she actually criticized how I folded her laundry. I had mentioned that fabric softener made my skin itch, a medical fact, not a personal preference. But Jennifer was spinning it into evidence of unreasonable demands. Instead of confronting her directly, I decided to gather ammunition. I started documenting everything in detail, recording her phone conversations when possible, photographing evidence, keeping meticulous notes. The next morning, she knocked once and entered before I could respond. "Good morning, Mom Foster," she said, but the warmth had completely drained from the nickname. "I've been thinking about how to make this living arrangement more sustainable." She handed me a printed sheet titled Household Contribution Expectations. Deep cleaning all bathrooms weekly, kitchen floors daily, all household laundry including delicates, complete grocery shopping and meal preparation, window washing, interior and exterior. "Jennifer, this is quite extensive. Some tasks might still be too strenuous." "Strenuous? You've been cleared for normal activity for over 2 months." Her voice carried an edge now. "I thought you'd appreciate the chance to contribute meaningfully. Of course I want to help, but this seems like David works incredibly hard to support this household," she interrupted. "And I've been managing everything else while also caring for you. This just balances things fairly." The phrase caring for you nearly made me laugh. If serving me inedible food and banishing me to the basement constituted care, Jennifer had a fascinating definition of the term. "I understand," I said quietly, but I was already planning my next move. That afternoon, while scrubbing her bathtub, I called my old church from my cell phone. "Pastor Williams? This is Margaret Foster. I need some guidance about resources for older adults in difficult family situations." "Mrs. Foster, what you're describing sounds concerning. Have you heard of Adult Protective Services?" I hadn't, but I was about to learn. "There are also legal aid services specifically for seniors," he continued, "and temporary housing options if you need to remove yourself from an unsafe situation." For the first time in weeks, I felt like I had options beyond simply enduring Jennifer's campaign. That evening, I made two important decisions. First, I would start building a case just as methodically as Jennifer was building hers. Second, I would reach out to David more assertively instead of waiting for his scheduled calls. If Jennifer wanted to play games with an old woman, she was about to discover that this old woman had learned a few tricks during her 63 years on Earth, and I was just getting started. 3 weeks into Jennifer's contribution schedule, I made a discovery that changed everything about how I understood what I was dealing with. While cleaning Jennifer's bedroom, one of my assigned tasks, I found a draft email tucked inside a book on her nightstand. The subject line made my blood freeze. "Urgent consultation needed, concerning behavioral changes." The email was addressed to Dr. Patricia Hendricks, geriatric specialist. "I'm seeking urgent consultation regarding my mother-in-law's alarming behavioral changes since her surgery. She's exhibited increasing paranoia, claiming I treat her poorly when I've shown nothing but care. She frequently seems confused about our conversations and has begun misplacing items, then accusing me of hiding them." Every word was a lie, but crafted with professional language. Jennifer had researched exactly how doctors assess cognitive decline. I photographed the draft immediately, my hands trembling. This wasn't random cruelty. This was a blueprint for having me declared mentally incompetent. But Jennifer's real mistake was getting overconfident. That evening, I heard her on the phone with someone, speaking louder than usual. "Dr. Hendricks? This is Jennifer Coleman. I need to schedule an urgent evaluation. Yes, my mother-in-law's condition has deteriorated significantly. I need professional documentation of her declining judgment." I managed to record most of the conversation on my phone, including Jennifer saying, "I need something in writing that shows she can't make sound decisions about her living situation anymore." This time, I successfully emailed the audio file to David's personal account with a clear subject line: "Urgent, listen to this recording." 2 days later, David called for our regular video chat. Jennifer appeared within moments, settling beside me with her practiced smile, but something felt different in the air. "There are my favorite ladies," David said, but his voice seemed more careful than usual. "We're doing well," Jennifer replied smoothly, "though your mom seemed confused yesterday about her appointment schedule." "Didn't you, Mom Foster?" I had no appointments scheduled, but before I could respond, David spoke. "Actually, Mom sent me something interesting recently, an audio recording." Jennifer went completely still. "I'm not sure what that would be about," she said, but tension crept into her voice. "It was a recording of you talking to a doctor about having my mother evaluated for cognitive decline. You specifically asked for documentation that she can't make sound decisions. Want to explain that?" The silence stretched endlessly. "David, I can explain," Jennifer finally said. "Your mother has been having episodes, and I was just exploring options to help." "What episodes? Be specific." "She gets confused about things, forgets conversations, makes accusations." Jennifer was speaking faster now, clearly improvising. "I was just trying to get professional guidance." "Mom," David interrupted, looking directly at me. "Are you confused about things? Are you forgetting conversations?" "No," I said clearly. "I'm not confused about anything, but I am concerned about being secretly scheduled for psychiatric evaluations based on fabricated symptoms." Jennifer's face flushed. "David, you don't understand what it's been like." "Jennifer," David's voice went dangerously quiet. "I want you to stop talking now." After the call ended, Jennifer turned to me with undisguised fury. "You recorded my private conversation. You violated my privacy. You were planning to have me declared mentally incompetent based on lies. You are paranoid and delusional. That call proves it. No, I said calmly. That call proves you're dangerous. But what Jennifer didn't realize was that she'd just made the crucial error that would ultimately destroy her. She'd shown her true intentions directly to David, and my son was much smarter than she'd given him credit for. After my recorded phone call reached David, Jennifer's approach shifted from subtle manipulation to open warfare. "I've made an appointment for you," she announced the next morning, brandishing a printed confirmation. "Dr. Patricia Hendricks, geriatric psychiatrist, Monday at 2 p.m. I don't need to see a psychiatrist." "I think you do. Your recent behavior, secretly recording private conversations, making paranoid accusations, suggests you need professional evaluation. Jennifer, you can't force me to see any doctor. Actually, as your primary caregiver while David's deployed, I absolutely can advocate for necessary medical intervention." Her smile was razor sharp, especially when someone shows declining judgment and reality distortion. She was twisting everything. My reasonable self-defense was being reframed as evidence of mental instability. "I won't go. Then I'll call David and explain that you've become completely uncooperative about your health care. How do you think that conversation will go?" Instead of arguing further, I made a decision that surprised even me. "You know what, Jennifer? Make that call right now. Let's get David on the line and discuss my mental health together." Her confidence flickered for just a moment. "I don't think that's necessary." "I do. Call him, right now. Tell him I'm refusing medical care and acting paranoid. Let's see what he says." Jennifer stared at me, realizing I'd just called her bluff. That afternoon, while she was at yoga, I took action on multiple fronts. First, I called Adult Protective Services and reported what was happening. "Ma'am, what you're describing constitutes elder abuse," the caseworker said. "We can open an investigation immediately." Second, I called David directly on his personal line. "Mom, is everything okay?" "David, Jennifer is trying to force me into a psychiatric evaluation with a doctor. She's already primed with false information about my mental state. I need you to know that I am completely mentally sound, and I will not submit to this." "She scheduled you for what?" "A psychiatric evaluation. She claims she can force me because she's my primary caregiver." "Mom, she's not your legal guardian. She has zero authority over your medical decisions." "She says she does." "She's lying." "Mom, listen carefully. You have the absolute right to refuse any medical treatment. Jennifer has no legal power over you whatsoever." Relief flooded through me. "David, there's more. I've been documenting everything she's said and done for weeks. I have recordings, photographs, detailed notes with dates and times. Send me everything you have. Every single piece of evidence." "What are you going to do?" "I'm coming home early. Family emergency leave got approved." "When?" "I'll be there Wednesday afternoon." "Mom, until then, be very careful. Don't let her isolate you or control your communications with anyone else." After we hung up, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months. Genuine hope. Jennifer thought she was backing me into a corner, but what she'd actually done was force me to find my strength and fight back. Wednesday was only 5 days away. I just needed to survive until then, without letting Jennifer realize her perfect plan was about to collapse completely. But Jennifer wasn't finished with me yet. The weekend before David's return, Jennifer's behavior became increasingly erratic and vindictive, like someone who sensed their control slipping away. Saturday morning, I found all my clothes dumped in garbage bags by the washing machine. "Thought you might want to wash everything," Jennifer explained with false innocence. "Some of your things smelled a bit musty downstairs." Nothing had smelled musty. She was forcing me to rewash my entire wardrobe just to demonstrate her power. Sunday, she served me dinner so oversalted it was nearly inedible, then expressed concern when I couldn't finish it. "You've been eating so little lately." "I'm worried about unhealthy weight loss." Every interaction was designed to create evidence of my decline that she could report to anyone who asked. But Monday morning, Jennifer made the mistake that would seal her fate forever. She was on the phone with someone, probably one of her friends, and didn't realize how clearly her voice carried through the house. "The crazy old bat is finally starting to crack," she said, with obvious satisfaction. "David's going to be shocked when he sees how far she's declined." I've got enough documentation to prove she needs full-time institutional care. I grabbed my phone and recorded the entire conversation, including Jennifer saying, "By Thursday, David will be begging me to help him find a good nursing home. Problem solved." That afternoon, Jennifer announced she was leaving for an overnight trip to visit her mother. "Last chance for some peace before David gets back and disrupts everything," she said with false sweetness. The moment her car left the driveway, I acted decisively. I called Pastor Williams. "I need to stay at the church guest house tonight. I need to be somewhere safe while I prepare for my son's return." "Of course, Mrs. Foster. Come right over." I packed a bag with my documentation, phone recordings, and photographs of Jennifer's fake emails. Then I called David. "Mom, what's wrong? I'm leaving the house tonight. I'm going to stay at my church until you get home tomorrow." "Did something happen?" "She's escalating rapidly, David. And I have new recordings of her admitting she's building a case to have me institutionalized by Thursday." "Jesus." "Mom, are you safe right now?" "Yes, she's gone until tomorrow. But David, when she realizes I'm not here, she's going to panic and probably call you with some dramatic story about me being missing or confused. Let her try. Mom, when I get home tomorrow, we're ending this permanently." That night, sleeping peacefully in the comfortable church guest room, I felt genuine serenity for the first time in months. No walking on eggshells, no psychological manipulation, no constant vigilance. But I also knew Jennifer's reaction to finding me gone would be swift and desperate. She'd realize her timeline was collapsing and resort to increasingly dangerous tactics. Tuesday morning, my phone started ringing at 6 a.m. sharp. Jennifer had discovered I was missing, and she was about to play her most desperate card yet. The question was whether David would see through it, or if her months of manipulation would finally pay off. Jennifer's first call came at exactly 6:03 a.m. "Margaret? Margaret, where are you? I came home and you're nowhere to be found." Her voice was perfectly calibrated, concerned, slightly panicked, like a devoted caregiver discovering her confused charge had wandered off. "I'm perfectly safe, Jennifer." "Safe? What do you mean safe? Where are you?" "Are you confused about where you live?" Even now, she was trying to paint me as disoriented. "I'm staying elsewhere until David gets home this afternoon." "Margaret, this is exactly the kind of concerning behavior I've been trying to address. You can't just disappear without telling anyone. What if you'd had a medical emergency? What if you'd gotten lost?" She was building her narrative in real time, but I wasn't playing along anymore. "Jennifer, I have recordings of you planning to have me institutionalized by Thursday. This conversation is over." I hung up. The phone immediately rang again. I didn't answer. 20 minutes later, 20. David texted, "Jennifer called saying you disappeared overnight, and she's worried about your mental state. Are you okay?" I texted back, "Completely fine. At church guest house, have new recordings of her admitting everything. Don't believe anything she tells you." At 8 a.m., Jennifer called David directly. "I know because he called me immediately afterward. Mom, Jennifer's claiming you left a note saying you couldn't take it anymore and that she's terrified you might harm yourself." "David, that's complete fiction. I left no note of any kind. I told her exactly where I was going and why. I figured as much." "But Mom, she's threatening to call police and report you as a missing person with dementia. Can she do that?" "She can try. But when police find you safe and coherent at your church, her credibility is going to take a major hit." At 10:30 a.m., Pastor Williams knocked on my door. "Mrs. Foster? Police are here. They received a missing person report about an elderly woman with possible cognitive impairment." I smiled grimly. Jennifer had overplayed her hand spectacularly. I met with Officers Rodriguez and Chen in the church lobby. They were professional, but clearly skeptical of the report they'd received. "Ma'am, we're responding to a missing person report filed by your daughter-in-law. She claims you left home overnight and may be experiencing confusion." "Officers, I'm not missing, confused, or impaired in any way. I left my son's house temporarily due to ongoing harassment from his wife, and I'm staying here until he returns from deployment this afternoon." "You seem completely lucid and oriented to us," Officer Rodriguez observed. "Can you tell us why your daughter-in-law might think you were missing?" "Because she's been building a false narrative about my mental decline to have me institutionalized. When I left voluntarily, it ruined her story." The officers exchanged meaningful glances. "Ma'am, What you're describing could constitute elder abuse, Officer Chen said gently. Are you interested in filing a report? Not yet. My son is handling the situation when he arrives this afternoon, but thank you for knowing that's an option. After the police left, I called David with an update. She actually called the police, he said, barely controlled fury in his voice. She reported you as missing with dementia. The officers saw right through it immediately. Good. Mom, I land at 3 p.m. Meet me at the house at 4. It's time Jennifer and I had a conversation she'll never forget. David, what are you planning? Justice, he said simply. That night, I slept better than I had in months, knowing that tomorrow would bring the reckoning Jennifer had been working so hard to avoid. Wednesday at 3:45 p.m., I stood on the front porch of the house that legally belonged to me, holding my key, but hesitating. 6 months ago, this had been my refuge. Today, it felt like walking into a battlefield. David's rental car pulled into the driveway as I gathered my courage. He looked exhausted from travel but determined in a way that reminded me of his father. Quiet, focused, and absolutely immovable when he'd made a decision. You ready for this, Mom? I've been ready for months. We walked into the house together. Jennifer appeared from the kitchen immediately, her face a perfect mask of relief and concern. Margaret, thank God you're safe. I was so worried when you disappeared like that. Stop, David said quietly. David! Jennifer's performance shifted seamlessly to devoted wife. I'm so glad you're here. I didn't know what to do when your mom just vanished. I said, stop talking. Something in David's tone penetrated Jennifer's confidence. She finally went quiet. Jennifer, sit down, David continued, gesturing to the living room. We need to have a conversation. We all sat, tension thick enough to cut. David pulled out his phone. I'm going to play some audio recordings my mother sent me. He played the first recording. Jennifer on the phone with Dr. Hendricks, requesting professional documentation of my incompetence. Jennifer's face paled, but she rallied quickly. David, I was just trying to get professional help for your mother. David played the second recording. Jennifer laughing about the crazy old bat finally cracking and having me institutionalized by Thursday. This time Jennifer had no immediate response. These recordings span several weeks, David continued calmly. They document a deliberate campaign to fabricate evidence of cognitive decline. David, you don't understand what it's been like living with her. Actually, I do understand. Because I also spent the last week verifying every story you told me about Mom's behavior. David pulled out a thick folder. I called her doctor. She's in perfect health. I spoke with grocery store managers. They remember her as a pleasant, coherent customer. I even talked to the Uber drivers who've taken her places. They all described her as sharp and oriented. Jennifer stared at the folder like it contained a bomb. Every single incident you reported to me about Mom's confusion or inappropriate behavior, I found evidence proving it never happened. You're taking her word over mine? I'm your wife. You were my wife, David corrected quietly. Past tense. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. David, please, here's what's going to happen. You have 2 hours to pack your personal belongings and leave this house permanently. You can't kick me out. This is my home too. No, it's not. This house belongs to my mother. I used her money to purchase it and put the deed in her name. You've been living here as a guest, and that invitation is permanently revoked. Jennifer looked between us, desperation replacing her usual confidence. Where am I supposed to go? I don't care, David said simply. As I watched Jennifer's world crumble around her, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months. Complete vindication. Jennifer cycled through every manipulation tactic in her arsenal, but none of them worked on David anymore. You're really going to believe her over me? She asked, crocodile tears starting to flow. David, she's been having episodes, real episodes. She gets confused and then fabricates stories to explain her confusion. Like the episode where you called Dr. Hendricks asking for documentation of her incompetence? David replied calmly. I was trying to get her help. Or the episode where you told someone she was finally cracking and you'd have her institutionalized by Thursday. Jennifer's tears stopped abruptly. This is all her fault, Jennifer snarled, pointing at me. She turned you against me. She's manipulative and jealous because she can't stand that you chose me. Mom didn't turn me against anyone, David said. You did that yourself. I never lied to you. David opened his folder again. Really? Because I have detailed notes of every conversation we've had about Mom's supposed episodes, and I spent this week fact-checking every single story. Jennifer went silent. You told me she seemed confused at the grocery store. The manager remembers her as one of their most polite customers. You said she got lost in an Uber. The driver said she gave perfect directions and tipped generously. I watched Jennifer's face cycle through emotions: anger, fear, desperation, and finally, cold fury. Fine, she said suddenly. You want to choose your mommy over your wife? Go ahead, but this isn't over. I'll be back with a lawyer. She stood up and smoothed her shirt with forced dignity. This house was our marital home. I have rights to half of everything here. David smiled for the first time since he'd arrived. Actually, Jennifer, you might want to check the timeline. This house was purchased with money from the sale of Mom's previous home and placed in her name before we were even engaged. It was never marital property. Jennifer's confident facade cracked completely. That's impossible. You never told me. I never told you a lot of things. Like the fact that I've suspected something was wrong for months. Like the fact that I moved most of our joint savings into a separate account before deployment. You can't do that. Already did. The account you have access to contains enough for maybe 6 weeks of expenses. After that, you'll need to figure out your own situation. Jennifer stared at David like she was seeing him for the first time. You planned this. You've been planning to leave me. No, David said quietly. I was hoping I was wrong about you. I was hoping I'd come back and find out Mom really was having problems and you were genuinely trying to help. He walked to the front door and opened it wide. But instead, I found out my wife spent 6 months psychologically torturing my mother in her own home. So you have 2 hours to pack and leave. Jennifer looked around the living room one last time, then fixed me with pure hatred. This is all your fault, you vindictive old witch. No, I said calmly. This is all your fault. I just survived it. 1 hour and 43 minutes later, we watched Jennifer load her belongings into her car. She didn't say goodbye, just drove away like the house had never meant anything to her. Maybe it hadn't. Maybe Jennifer had only ever seen it as a stage for her performance. But as her taillights disappeared, I realized something had fundamentally changed in me over the past 6 months. I was stronger now, more confident, less willing to accept treatment that diminished my dignity. Jennifer had tried to break me, but instead, she'd taught me exactly how resilient I really was. The divorce took 14 months, longer than I'd hoped, but Jennifer fought for everything she could get. She hired an aggressive attorney and claimed spousal support, half the household furnishings, and even argued for partial ownership of my personal belongings. She's claiming she provided unpaid caregiving services that should be compensated, David's lawyer explained. She's also alleging emotional distress from false accusations of abuse. Even in divorce court, Jennifer tried to rewrite history and paint herself as the victim, but David had prepared thoroughly. When Jennifer's lawyer presented her evidence of my mental decline, David's attorney countered with medical records proving my cognitive fitness, signed statements from grocery store employees about my normal behavior, and detailed documentation of her fabricated incidents. Most damaging were Jennifer's own recorded admissions, the phone calls where she openly discussed building a case for my institutionalization. Your Honor, David's attorney argued, Mrs. Coleman's claims of providing necessary care are contradicted by her own words, admitting she fabricated evidence of decline. This wasn't caregiving, this was elder abuse. The judge was clearly unimpressed with Jennifer's case. In the final settlement, Jennifer received no spousal support, no claim on the house, and only personal belongings she'd brought to the marriage. She was also ordered to pay half of David's legal fees. Most importantly, the court issued a restraining order prohibiting Jennifer from coming within 300 feet of me or the house. How do you feel? David asked as we left the courthouse. Free, I said simply. David took extended leave to help me fully reclaim my home and my life. We redecorated rooms, planted a garden, and slowly transformed the house into a place of peace again. I found part-time work doing bookkeeping for a local nonprofit, work that gave me purpose and financial independence. David was reassigned to Fort Gordon in Georgia, close enough for regular visits, but far enough that we both maintained our autonomy. Most importantly, I learned to trust my instincts again. Jennifer had spent months making me question my perceptions and doubt my reality. Recovery from that kind of manipulation takes time, but every day I felt more confident in my own judgment. A year after the divorce was finalized, I was working in my garden when I noticed a car driving slowly past the house. Jennifer, looking older and worn down, staring at the home she'd lost through her own choices. I felt a brief moment of something, not pity exactly, but sadness for the waste of it all. Then I went back to my roses. They needed attention, and this was my garden now. 3 months later, I heard through acquaintances that Jennifer had moved to Florida and remarried quickly, a retired businessman she'd met online. I hoped, for his sake, that she'd learned something from the consequences of her behavior, but I doubted it. People like Jennifer rarely change. They just find new targets. But that wasn't my concern anymore. I had my home, my peace, my relationship with my son, and my hard-earned knowledge of exactly how strong I could be when I needed to be. Sometimes, that's all the victory anyone needs. 2 years after Jennifer's final exit from my life, I was volunteering at the senior center when I spotted her across the room at a community event. She looked different, thinner, more brittle, with the kind of tension that comes from always being on guard. When she saw me, I could see her debating whether to approach or leave immediately. She chose to approach. "Margaret," she said carefully, testing whether my name might explode in her mouth. "Hello, Jennifer. You look well." She seemed genuinely surprised by this. "I am well, thank you." She glanced around nervously, then leaned slightly closer. "Look, I know things got complicated between us back then, but I hope you understand I was under tremendous stress. Sometimes people say things they don't mean when they're overwhelmed." I looked at her for a long moment. She was still trying to rewrite history, turning 6 months of calculated psychological abuse into stress-induced poor judgment. "Jennifer, I hope you found happiness in your life." It was all I was willing to give her. No forgiveness, no shared responsibility for what happened, no validation of her attempt to minimize her actions. Her face showed disappointment, as if she'd hoped for something more. Perhaps mutual acknowledgement of mistakes, or agreement to forget the past. But some things shouldn't be forgotten or minimized. "Well," she said finally, "I suppose I should let you get back to your volunteering. Take care of yourself, Jennifer." I walked away without looking back, just as I'd done the day she left my house. That evening, I told David about the encounter. "How did it feel seeing her again?" he asked. "Anticlimactic," I said honestly. "She seemed smaller somehow, less threatening." "That's because she has no power over you anymore. She probably expected you to still be afraid or angry or something she could manipulate. But I'm not afraid anymore. I'm not even angry." And that was true. The fear Jennifer had cultivated so carefully had evaporated when the truth came out. The anger I'd carried had faded too, replaced by something more valuable. Complete confidence in my ability to recognize manipulation and protect myself from it. "You know what the best part is?" I told him. "I'm not the same person she tried to destroy. I'm stronger, more aware, less willing to accept poor treatment from anyone." 6 months later, I started leading a support group for seniors who'd experienced abuse. My experience with Jennifer gave me insight into how psychological manipulation works and how to fight back. The most important thing, I tell people in my groups, is to trust your own perceptions. If someone is making you feel confused about reality, that's not an accident. That's a strategy. Some people I work with have suffered worse abuse than I did, but all have that same look I remember from my darkest days, the look of someone who's been made to doubt their own sanity. My job is helping them remember they're not crazy, not imagining things, and they deserve dignity and respect. It's work I wish someone had been doing for me during those awful months. Since no one was, I'm doing it for others now. What would you have done in my situation? Let me know in the comments below. Because here's what I learned. Surviving psychological abuse doesn't just make you a victim. It can make you a warrior for others who need someone to believe them and remind them of their worth. Hours before that final confrontation, I was the one with nowhere to go, living at the mercy of someone who saw me as an inconvenience to eliminate. Today, Jennifer knows exactly how that feels. But the difference is, I never tried to destroy someone else to get what I wanted. I just refused to let someone destroy me. And sometimes, that's all the justice the world requires. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe and feel free to share your story in the comments. Your voice matters. When I told my son I lost my job, he arrived with legal papers. Sign here. It legally separates our finances. When you die broke, your debts stay yours. I won't be dragged down by a loser. Hurt, but calm, I signed everything. He had no idea about the $900 million inheritance I'd just received, or what I was about to do with it. If you're watching this, subscribe and let me know where you're watching from. Let me take you back to how this all started. 3 days earlier, I'd been stacking returned books at the Millfield Public Library when Mrs. Henderson, the head librarian, called me into her office. At 67, I'd worked there part-time for 8 years, ever since my husband died and I needed something to fill the empty hours. "Margaret," she said, not meeting my eyes, "budget cuts mean we have to eliminate your position. Today's your last day." Just like that. 8 years of service, gone. They gave me a cardboard box and 15 minutes to pack my desk. I drove home to my small apartment, feeling like the world was crumbling beneath my feet. My Social Security barely covered rent, and that library job paid for groceries and utilities. But that evening, something extraordinary happened. The mail carrier knocked on my door with a certified letter from Switzerland. Inside was a letter from a law firm informing me that my great-aunt Beatrice, a woman I'd met exactly once at a family reunion 30 years ago, had died and left me her entire estate. The number made me sit down hard. $900 million. I read it 3 times. Sure, it was a mistake. But the lawyers were very real, very Swiss, and very serious. Aunt Beatrice had made a fortune in rare art and European real estate. She'd never married, had no children, and apparently remembered the one family member who'd actually talked to her about her paintings that day in 1995. I should have been ecstatic. Instead, I felt oddly calm as I folded the letter and put it in my kitchen drawer. I didn't call anyone. I didn't celebrate. I just made myself tea and sat at my little table, thinking about how my life had just completely changed. The next morning, David called. "Mom, I heard about the library. Look, I know this is hard, but Patricia and I have been talking." Patricia, my daughter-in-law, who treated me like an inconvenient obligation. "We think this might be a blessing in disguise, a chance for you to downsize, simplify your life." What he meant was, move somewhere cheaper so you're not our problem. I told him I was fine, that I'd figure something out. But David has never been one to let things go when he thinks he knows better. That's how I ended up opening my door yesterday afternoon to find my son standing there with a briefcase, looking like he was about to foreclose on my apartment. "We need to talk," he said, pushing past me into my living room. "Patricia's been researching, and there are legal ways to protect families from financial liability." "Smart planning, Mom." He opened his briefcase with the efficiency of a businessman, which he was. David sold insurance and had done well for himself, well enough to live in a house 3 times the size of my apartment, well enough to take vacations to Europe while I clipped coupons. "These documents legally separate our finances," he explained, spreading papers across my coffee table. "It means when you inevitably can't pay your bills, when you need expensive medical care, when you die with debts, none of that becomes our responsibility." I stared at him. "When I die with debts? Mom, be realistic. You're 67, unemployed, living on Social Security. The math isn't hard." His voice was patient, like he was explaining basic addition to a child. "Patricia calculated your monthly expenses versus your income. You'll be broke within 2 years, 3 at most." Patricia. Of course she'd calculated my poverty down to the penny. "Sign here," he said, pointing to signature lines. "It's just smart planning. When you die broke, your debts stay yours. I won't be dragged down by a loser." That word hit me like a slap. Loser. My own son, calling me a loser. But I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I just picked up the pen and signed every page where he indicated. David watched with obvious relief, probably thinking